Good afternoon. On behalf of Leadership Northwest Missouri, we would like to welcome you to today's Continuing the Conversations book discussion on White Fragility. My name is Deb Powers, and I am proud to be the Executive Director for Leadership Northwest Missouri. And today we have a wonderful group of diverse leaders joining us for the conversation. We have participants that are inclusive of entrepreneurs. We have corporate businesses, small business. We have nonprofits, library services, leadership organizations, some individuals from higher education, from government, from hospitals, and other healthcare organizations. I hope I've got everyone covered. If not, I apologize in advance. But we are so happy to have you with us today. At this time, I would like to welcome and introduce those that will be presenting today. First of all, I'd like to introduce our facilitator, Robin Westfall. Robin, can you wave at us?
Hey,
Great.
everybody.
Robin, in 2018, Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft selected Robin to be our Missouri State Librarian.
Who knew there was such a thing?
Yeah, we love it. We're so proud of you. And prior to that, Robin spent 12 years as library director at the Livingston County Library in Chillicothe. After that, she went to Johnson City, Tennessee to be the library director there. But we're glad that Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft brought her back to Missouri because Robin works really hard to enhance the role that libraries play in the communities of Missouri. She works very hard to ensure that all Missourians have equal access to library services, which is so critical. And Robin, we appreciate all that you do for us.
Thank you.
Today we also have two co-presenters, Isaac Collins, who is a community entrepreneur. Isaac, wave, there we go. Right after college, Isaac purchased his first business in Iowa, the Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory. He decided to move back to Kansas City, and upon moving back, he purchased a Yogurtini self-serve frozen yogurt franchise on the plaza. He and his wife, Rachel, now own two additional Yogurtini franchises, one in Shoal Creek, and last Friday, they just opened their third location in Overland Park. Hey, way to go, Isaac.
Thank you. We're tired, but thank you.
Isaac is also co-founder of Superhero Yoga, which is dedicated to providing consistent yoga instruction to students attending under-resourced schools in the Kansas City area. And of course, COVID-19 has that on hold for a little while. But Isaac, thank you for being here with us to share today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So excited to see everybody.
Great. Our second co-presenter is Dr. Tim Crowley. Hey, Tim, can you wave at us? Perfect. Tim has been speaking publicly for nearly 3 decades. He talks about experiences he's had as a psychologist, an adjunct university teacher, a leadership expert, and business owner. For more than 25 years, Tim has engaged, motivated, and inspired companies, organizations, and individuals all across the nation to change their actions and attitudes in ways proven to help us communicate better, to become stronger leaders, to build highly effective teams, and also to work with passion to improve our lives and to improve our businesses. Missouri has been Tim's home for at least 30 years, I believe, and he has facilitated Leadership Northwest Missouri for the past 20 years. Tim, thank you for joining us today as well. We're so happy to have you here.
Hey, go ahead.
And I know Tim has a few thoughts he wants to share with us today. So at this time, I'm just going to turn it over to Tim.
Well, thanks, Deb, and I'd like to welcome everybody this afternoon. Before we jump in on the book discussion on White Fragility, I just want to ask these three words, which typically we use day in and day out. I think they're taking on way more meaning in 2020. How are you doing during COVID-19? And gosh, I can remember when the Chiefs won the Super Bowl, and that seems like 20 years ago now, and how our lives and lives of our friends and family and people throughout this country and around the world have just been turned upside down. And I just want you to know from Isaac, Robin, and myself and Deb that our thoughts go out to each and every one of you individually, to your families, to the people in your community, your workplace, your neighborhoods, and know that we're all in this together. And I want to shift and just say thank you for taking time out to be here. I believe everybody that's showing up to do this, I believe that we're leaders. I define leadership and leaders much different than most people. I don't really look at titles and org charts as much as I do. I think leadership is much more about impact and influence and contribution. So thank you for saying yes to this opportunity. Thank you for showing up today. And we really want to make this a collaborative experience. So the four of us are going to do our very best to have you engaged almost from the get-go. So before I turn this over to Robin, I'm going to ask a question, and I want you just really quickly, without a lot of thought, just write your answer in the response. What is it that you want to get out of this book discussion on White Fragility? What would you like to leave with? What would you like to learn? And we're not looking for any specific answers, but why are you here? What do you want to leave with? What would you like to learn? And we'll come back to some of those thoughts later.
Yeah, so just put that in the chat.
Yep.
And yeah, we'll come back to that again. So,
Yeah.
Gosh, that's a great start, Tim.
Oh, thank you. Robin,
Okay, so here's what the four of us decided in the midst of COVID, let's do something great and light. So let's have two discussions on books about racism. But honestly, the timing couldn't be more perfect, I think, as Tim says. And you know, I'm glad he asked the question, why are you here today? The second part of this book, is White Fragility. And I think sometimes we forget about the second part. Why is it so hard for white people to talk about racism? Why is it so hard for us to have uncomfortable conversations? In reading this book, I definitely felt called out, and I consider myself an ally. I'm on the path toward becoming an anti-racist, or at least thinking about and supporting anti-racist policies. I started this book and I'm thinking, hey, it's not about me. I'm a good white person. Remember, though, racism isn't about bad people. It's about a system that's designed to uphold white dominance. But the book is going to focus, and if you haven't read it, it focuses on how we can recognize why are we still hanging on to the idea that we must be comfortable, and begin to think and act in ways that truly move toward becoming anti-racist. So I learned that I want to be called out. Calling out is a gift, as it calls us to rise up and to do more, to tap into our empathy, and to do the serious and critical work of interrogating our own beliefs and biases. That's why we're here. We're here to be called out and find out how to act when we're called out and how to call out others. If you attended our first Continuing the Conversation session, I think you'll find this format of this one a little bit different. We are going to have more opportunities for engagement and communication with you as we go along. So there'll be some times when I'll be asking questions, and we encourage you, as you did last time, have your own conversations and chat. Keep that going. That's a critical part of what it is that we're trying to do. So this book discussion could be seen as both a reckoning and a call to action. So let's begin. Dr. Robin DiAngelo received her PhD in multicultural education from the University of Washington, and she's taught and done research at various universities. She coined the phrase white fragility in 2011 and released this book in 2018. Dr. Angelo talks about how white people are receptive to, have been receptive to her presentations as long as it remains abstract. We're going to get beyond that today. So Tim, when we talk about this book and we read it, who do you think that Dr. DiAngelo, and I'm going to have to call her Dr. DiAngelo because Robin talking about Robin is just going to get us confused. Who do you think Dr. Angelo's primary audience for this book was?
Well, I was surprised and actually a little bit taken back, and I had to let go of some of my own white fragility and defensiveness. And I've been doing leadership and diversity and inclusion training for well over 25 years. And it's for people like you, because you called yourself out, and myself. It's really for the most part, for those of us that think we've arrived, that we get it, that we understand it. And oftentimes, until I read Ibram Kendi's book, I would say that I'm not racist. It's often for those of us that think we have it. And this is what happens because we think we got it and we can't be taught anything. Rarely do we ever close our mouth and open our ears and open our hearts. And rarely do we really listen to Black people and people of color when they talk. And so unfortunately, so many Black people and people of color check out and they don't feel safe with us. So it's really much more for those of us that are probably attending this today.
And so Isaac, I come to you when you saw this book title and you thought about what does she mean when she says white fragility. What do you think that definition is, and how is that definition different than, say, white privilege and white supremacy?
Sure. Well, first off, I'm extremely excited to be here with so many people. I love the fact that we're having this conversation. I think that'll be a reoccurring theme you'll hear me say through any time I speak is I love that we're actually coming to the table, or I guess the table with the laptop on in it, and like we're on the Zoom call and we're talking to one another and we're having open discussions, because that's why we birthed this continuing the conversation series that we're doing, is because we need to have these conversations so we start to understand. But diving into it, this concept of white fragility, whenever, George Floyd got murdered back May 25th, I kept hearing about this book as people were throwing out all of these different resources for people to learn and to understand this race battle. I had never heard of this book, or I had never heard of Dr. Robin DiAngelo either. And so I wanted to check it out for myself. And so I read some of the book early on, and my wife bought it, and I watched pretty much all of her YouTube videos. And I got a good understanding of what this is. And I thought it was so cool that with everything that she said, she was so spot on with her interactions between white people and Black people when it talks about the concept and the topic of race. So I thought it was really cool. So white fragility as a definition refers to feelings of discomfort a white person experiences when they witness discussions around racial inequality and injustice. And so oftentimes when we're in those conversations, or I'll use myself, when I'm in those conversations with friends or colleagues or people that I just meet, a defensiveness comes up. And sometimes, or most times, it's from people, like you're saying, who looks at themselves as an ally. Oh, I'm not racist. I'm not that. I am on your side. And there are certain things that are said that are actually pretty offensive in there. And I think maybe that's why the defensiveness comes up. And Dr. Robin DiAngelo speaks on that very clearly. And it was really, really cool to be able to read that. And so in those encounters, sometimes people of color feel obligated to comfort a white person to avoid any kind of dissension or further confrontation. And I think that's why we're here. So no party has to compromise their thought process or their feelings on this topic when it comes to defending their side. However, we can actually sit at the table and have a conversation about this, void of anger, void of silence and shutting down, void of feelings being hurt. We can sit here and actually understand how we can collectively get better and individually get better as we go through this journey. So I really liked it. I think if you learn something, know if you are being called out, if you are being asked not to say something or corrected, please don't get defensive in your everyday life. Please lean into empathy, to understanding, to compassion. And this is actually something that Tim says a lot in those times, whether it's now or it's in your daily life when this does come up. Try not to comprehend and try to figure it out with your head. Actually listen and try to figure out with your heart, because that'll allow you to lead with compassion and love and empathy for that person and understand where they're coming from instead of being defensive to maybe protect your own feelings in that time. So I loved it. I learned a ton from the book, and it was really, really good. Yeah.
She makes a distinction, and you're going to hear us say a few of these phrases as we go along. And I think Isaac defined it. White fragility is that feeling of discomfort a white person experiences when they witness discussions about racial inequality and injustice, which is different from white privilege, which is the fact that white people have an advantage in society that others do not. It's an obvious statement. And then the term white supremacy, Isaac, this is typical, this is a little bit different the way she talks about it than what we think of white supremacy. Charlottesville, others, it's that belief that people with white skin are superior. So it's not necessarily I mean, it's negative, but it's not the connotation, I think, that a lot of people associate with that term.
Yeah. And those are great definitions for all three, and something that we can understand, especially for this conversation, because you will probably hear all three, and we're not meaning them to trigger you, but we are meaning them to make you uncomfortable. So it's good that you have a breakdown in the definitions going forward, so you don't lump all three together and know that they are, or they can be, separate as we go forward.
Okay. Tim, is there anything you would like to add on that?
Oh, we're going to do more with white supremacy and further down the road. So
okay. I'm going to share with you my screen, and Tim's going to talk about something Isaac just touched on. The book talks about racial. See, I've told this, guys, when we practice this, racial stressors was one of those words I was not going to be able to say fast. May cause a range of defensive behavior and emotions. And so we're going to take a look at some of these that she talks about in the book. And Tim, if you would touch on these a little bit, can you all now see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. These are what she says are really some of the defensive behaviors and emotions that when we address this topic, when people are experiencing white fragility, that they may experience. So, I'll let you expound.
So Robin's put a series of slides together that we're going to go through, and I'll just be touching on them. What I would like you to do individually is to look at your own life. This is an opportunity for self-reflection, just for you to weigh in on who you are, where you've been, where you're at, where you want to go, and just see what you identify with. So with racial stressors, she's actually talking about situations. It could be in work, it could be in family, you could be at the grocery store, but when you're confronted with any discomfort related to race, or to conversations about racial justice or injustice, which right now, I don't know how you can be an American and not be, unless you're not paying attention to what's going on around you. I don't know how we're not having discussions around race. Unfortunately, one of the things that saddens me, so we started doing these Zoom sessions, and actually with Leadership Northwest Missouri right in March. every time we meet, there's another murder or death of an unarmed Black man. And it's like, and I say this every time, so it's like, I'm getting wore out. I'm getting tired and exhausted. But Isaac, I have no idea what it's like to be a Black man and a Black person or a person of color. And so as we start into this, the whole idea for everybody, it's to heighten our own awareness, because that's where all change starts. When we can heighten our own awareness, then awareness makes behaviors detectable, and then we can begin to change them. So think of yourself when you've been in any situations in your own family, with work, in the neighborhood, in your community, where you've been, maybe somebody's actually called you out, somebody gave you a nudge. How do you respond to those stressors? So these are typically what Dr. DiAngelo says she experiences, and this is the data that she collects from her research. So very common to see people angry. And so usually anger, if you look at the bottom where it says leave the situation, oftentimes people will leave, or they'll just shut up and they're not going to say another word. People will talk about being frightened and feeling unsafe. And yet as a white person, I get confused with that, because I do hear a lot of my white friends and family talk sometimes about being fearful and afraid and unsafe. And yet look around, Black men are being killed when they're walking home from school, when they're jogging, when they're breaking up a fight. A Black woman was killed when she was sleeping, and we're so afraid. I think we need to find ways to be able to let some of our defenses down. Oftentimes guilt is something that I've felt before. I've told Steph many times that I feel guilty for being a white guy, and I don't want to feel guilty for being a white guy. We all know the arguing, the silence. Silence usually is, my body's here, but I'm checked out, and I'm not.
Well, and honestly, Tim, I think about this. Guilt may be a good place to start, because at least then you're going to start being open to some conversations, and hopefully guilt doesn't lead to leaving the situation. But you're hopefully with guilt, and I think probably a lot of us sitting here do feel the same way, that you've already, there's the anger and the fear, are not necessarily your racial stressors, but certainly that gets you maybe toward beginning to really want to change. I'm going to move on to the next group of.
Let me say something about that real quick, which we're going to talk about. Here's what we don't want to have happen with guilt, that I could feel so guilty as Isaac's calling me out on something, that then I have white women tears or white men tears, and then I begin to cry, and it's authentic, and sob, and yet all of a sudden that energy is taken away from having the conversation that needs to happen, and it just makes white solidarity continue. So, but yeah, so those are just common things. So let me ask you, as we're getting ready to shift, can you identify your typical response when you're in those situations? And then here's the next question. What will you do differently? What can we do differently? What will you do differently? What are you open to changing? So.
Yeah, think about that. We're going to go over one more slide, and we're going to kind of open this up for you to be able to discuss both of these racial stressors and then the behaviors that are sort of associated with that. And so Dr. DiAngelo talks about, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. It's feelings, not behaviors. Feelings, which are very similar to the stressors. So these are feelings when we're confronted with a discussion that then becomes when a discussion that then becomes uncomfortable, and we're not sure that we're ready for it. Some of the things that I think we definitely sense this, and right now, and it's probably because we're in COVID, most of the conversations that I am having around race, unfortunately, seem to be on social media, because the opportunity just isn't necessarily there for those conversations around the restaurant table or in other group settings. And so a lot of that's happening on social media, unfortunately, which I think is really it's a difficult platform for us to work toward a sense of anti-racism. But some of these feelings and Tim, you can talk a little bit about these too, but I think there's guilt, feeling guilty again. I think insulted and judged are big with this. Is there any particular that you can think of, Tim, that we really should cover more?
Actually, I would have everybody just kind of look at it in your own, with your own eyes and heart. Maybe think of how is it that you typically respond if you're called out, or if there's attention brought to you because of assumptions that you may have, or certain behaviors, or conversations, or words that you've shared. Typically, how do you respond emotionally? And I can remember very clearly when it was about, I graduated from undergrad in 1981. Then I went out to San Francisco and I was visiting my sister, and we're hanging out with a bunch of her people of colored friends and black friends and white people. And she told me I was racist. And I don't see the word up there, but I'm going to guess it was attacked. But I felt so hurt. I graduated from this liberal college. I'm a good guy. I like people. I'm good to people. You know what? I was so hurt, and I felt singled out and attacked. I just checked out, and I ended up leaving the situation. I never went, to this day, I've never circled back to the conversation and said, hey, can you tell me more about what I did or what I said? Now I would do that. So what is it that you do? What have you done? What are you aware of other people that are close to you that might exhibit? And in a moment, we'll open this up to discussions and just really share some thoughts and ideas about how you have just your emotional response. And then really, you could probably do this, Robin. Go ahead and flick to the next one, because the feelings, they're the antecedent. They are what triggers these behaviors. So normally we have these emotions, and these emotions contribute to this. So at the very end of our conversation today, we're going to make a suggestion that we learn to respond different emotionally, and we'll have a different set of behaviors. So go ahead and even look at those behaviors. So you're just really doing a self-check. And it doesn't matter if you're what your ethnic background is, just to be able to look and it's an awareness check.
And I think we all have seen this. Especially the emotionally withdrawing and physically leaving. I think that after the behaviors, I'm going to show the next one, Tim, and I think we're going to open it up at that point, because I think when we feel a certain way, we certainly then need to justify ourselves. And then, some of the claims that people make when they have the feelings and the behaviors is the justification, and the claims are aimed at either the presenter, well, you're an elitist, or they're us justifying ourselves. And I'll let you speak to this, Tim, and then we're going to open it up for discussion.
Let's see if you can make the connections, everybody. So when we say something, by the way, we're typically unaware of it. We're not even aware. And somebody's brave enough, courageous enough to tap you on, I like to think of it as tapping you on the shoulder, giving you a nudge versus calling you out, but saying, hey, Tim, do you notice what you just said was racist? Instead of responding defensively. So we have to catch our blind spots. We have to be aware of our emotions. And what if we can then change our behaviors, which will lead to a different set of claims? But I bet most of us at some time in our life can identify with some of those feelings, behaviors, and these claims. Under justifying ourselves, I can remember when I started first doing this work. So I'm the 11th child of 13 kids, grew up primarily in a single parent family, tons of poverty, tons of abuse. Really felt like I've learned from my mom to have grit and resilience, and somehow got to the other side of that. And so I took offense to people that said I had white privilege and that I was racist. And like I said, hell, you don't know me. You don't even have an idea of who I am. So it was all that defensive part of me. And as long as I responded there, people of color and black people could not even have a conversation with me. And so she actually addresses that in her book. And Dr. DiAngelo says, it doesn't minimize any of the hard things that you've done as white people, but you still, I have white privilege that Isaac does not have. I have benefits because of the color of my skin that Isaac does not have. So
So let's talk about this. You can either in the chat, or we thought we were going to do the raise the hand, but I think that we can manage sort of the conversation. So when you look at this, especially the claims, are these things that you yourself, you feel like you have said, or that you have found someone saying to you? And doesn't it make us more comfortable when we can either aim our discomfort at the presenter, or that we can justify ourselves? And so why do you think that this is important, an important component of this discussion? And Deb, I'm going to let you, because I can't see everybody right now since I'm looking at my screen that I'm sharing. So if there's the embedded hand raise, we can do it that way. But also, just feel free to unmic yourself and talk about this.
You can share any of your personal response and your history of all the years you've been on the planet, of how you've responded to similar situations, what your emotional response was like, perhaps your behaviors. Like Robin said, can you identify any ways that you've made claims? Really what this is helping us do is just looking at why we're so fragile. This is what we do.
I think the question in chat, the question is, do you think the author would think that the following question is valid? I'm not a racist, but why do people of color say act blank, in a certain way? To me, that would be part of the claims. Part of it is that it takes it away from you. It takes away from how you're acting and what things are you're saying, and then puts it on the onus of the other group. Is how I think probably the author would address that.
Well, and we know how Ibram Kendi would address it. So like back in the day when my sister said I was racist, and I said, the hell I am, you don't know me, I'm not racist. By the way, Kendi says you can't be, either you're racist, there's no such thing as not racist. Either you're racist or you're anti-racist. So, which means for a lot of us, there's a whole lot of learning that has to go on.
I did see Deanne raise her hand.
Yes, I had a situation yesterday that left me very upset and wondering how I should have reacted different. I was at Walmart and turned the aisle to go down a one-way aisle, and of course everybody has masks on, and there were two Black women standing at the end of the aisle that I was wanting to go down, and I was just smiling under my mask, and I was just waiting for them to finish their business and move on. And one of them said, "You don't need to stand there and expect us to get out of your way," and was just really kind of calling me out. And I was just standing there waiting for them to do their business. And so I said, "I'm sorry," and I went the different way. But then I wondered, well, should I try to explain myself? Should I say I didn't intend to hurt you? I mean, but you're in the middle of Walmart, right? You don't want to make a scene. But I felt like I was being called out for not doing anything, and I just left and didn't say anything more. But should you try to explain yourself, or do you just drop it?
I've got Isaac. You have a response?
Yeah. So hearing that circumstance and whatnot, it doesn't sound like you did anything wrong. Maybe Tim will address it in a different light. But I don't think that you should have explained yourself, because it sounds like there was an unneeded attack on something that you did that you weren't doing wrong. You're just waiting for humans to move their bodies out of your way.
Right.
So I don't think that was a bad thing. If I were to address one thing in that story is, it's so hard nowadays to know what is and is not a race thing. And so I don't know if that circumstance was a race thing. And so just saying that it was two Black women, I don't know if that is needed in that circumstance. You know what I mean? Like, I would more look at that as, you know, two women giving you an unneeded attitude.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because if you had done something that provoked that, that may be a different circumstance, but it doesn't sound like you did. So unfortunately, we're at a time now where it's so hard to tell where we're at because racial tensions are so high in our country. Does that make sense?
Right, exactly.
So
Yeah,
sometimes it's hard to kind of balance that, like, oh, is this a racial situation or is this just a situation?
yeah. So I tried to be, I tried to be gracious and just step out. And with the masks on, we can't see each other's expressions and really get a good feel of what's going on. So
yeah, I definitely agree with you. The masks complicate everything.
So I've got a little different spin, and I'm going to share it here in a moment. And it's Deanne, right?
yes.
And then after I share, I'd like one of the participants, because I'm sure Isaac and I are not the only ones who have thoughts on it. And so to me, so there's a situation. I think there's many paths up a mountain. There's many ways to look at situations. There's many ways to deal with things.
Mm-hmm.
So typically, Deanne, I'm curious, how do you deal with conflict?
Robin could probably answer this better for me.
He avoids it.
I avoid.
Yeah, and by the way, that's probably common for most of us. Most of us are gonna like turn around and walk away, or else we get ugly, and we don't want to do that. So most of us like vote with our feet and leave. And so, and I'm with Isaac. I don't think you did anything wrong. And yet, here's what if life could become? What if the world we could see the metaphor as a classroom and as a place to learn? And so what if we could take Stephen Covey's advice, which is not easy because this situation popped up out of nowhere, but he says this: seek first to understand others before asking them to understand you or me. So what if those were two women and something just terribly tragic happened with someone important in their life, or they're, as Black women, they're really concerned about what happened to Jacob Blake and then the two other men that were shot, and they were engulfed in that conversation. But we just don't know.
Right.
So I think especially during COVID right now, I think it's important that all of us give other people grace and that we give ourselves grace. So how could we give those women grace and then give yourself grace at the same time? This is what I probably would have done now I'm 61. I probably wouldn't have started doing this till I was in my 50s. I might have even leaned into the conversations and said, oh, I'm sorry, or help me to understand, or what's going on, or I might even in some interesting way this is me. I wouldn't have done this until really a few years ago. I would have found a way to do what I call strive for connection. I would have to find some way to create connection, because at the end of the day, that's what these continuing conversations are for. We want to create connections, and connections create collaborations, and the idea that with all of our differences, we're much more alike. So
I think, like hearing that, it makes me think, we see so many of what we call Karens, on TV. It's white women needing to supervise people of color in any situation. And so without the personal engagement, just engaging through saying hi or excuse me or those types of things, we are easily perceived as we're that Karen who's needing to supervise. We're watching to see what's happening, what's going to be wrong. And so I think we have to be aware of that, because whether we did anything wrong or something happened prior to, like you said, Isaac, we see so much racial tension currently happening, and it comes from, I can only imagine that I would feel heightened going into Walmart and knowing that somebody was, standing there waiting or watching or, those types of things, because we're seeing it all the time. And so it's almost creating, it's creating this feeling of self-consciousness, like now everyone's watching me, when that may not even be the reality.
That's an excellent
that's
point.
a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback as well, and we'll continue to talk about this. One other thing as and not in that circumstance in general, but culturally, and it's hard if you don't know the other cultures, kind of like, I don't want to say mannerisms, but different things that they do. But every culture does things a little bit differently, and so just to enlighten this group a little bit. So in the Black community, and I think this is for everyone, but especially culturally, if you look at someone too long, that usually means there's some sort of beef there. And I think that's kind of worldwide, but especially in the Black community, that is kind of just something where you're kind of taught as a kid, like, you know, watch your eyes, because that can be misconstrued. And so I don't know if that was maybe a little bit that went into it. And I think that feeds in again of like not knowing, but also seeking to understand. And like Tim said, maybe asking that question. I'm very extroverted on a general basis, but when I'm in places like the supermarket, I don't want to talk to anybody. So I probably wouldn't have sought out to understand more in that circumstance if I was in your case, Deanne. But you know, you're walking down the street or somewhere where you are in the mood to engage someone, I think that that's a great time, because we are so similar as people. I think the media makes it seem like we're so vastly different. We have these different mindsets and views on the world and different things. But at the end of the day, we all want food on our table to feed our families, and safety and security and shelter and that kind of stuff. And we're striving to be the best people we can be, whatever it looks like for us. And so I think once we start having conversations, it kind of opens up to, wow, we actually do a lot of similarities. So
Way more alike than different. Deanne,
yeah,
Deanne, what you just did is what we want everybody on this Zoom to do. Just we all want to be more self-reflective and to say, I wonder if I could have done that differently, but to be aware and to look in and to, you know, learn from our own self-reflection, and then to be brave enough right now to put your voice out on the Zoom and let us have a conversation around it. So I'm curious on the chat, is there anyone else wants to weigh in on this before we move forward? Any other thoughts?
Also, thanks for your question.
It's so situational. You know, I think that I had a very similar interaction.
And that is really garbled. I don't know if it's just garbled to me.
With two women in Ross about a month ago, complete opposite thing. It was the same situation. Hold on. Can you hear me now?
So I would suggest, if you have video on, I would probably turn the video off, because I think we might be able to hear you better if the internet's not trying to both access video and audio, but it's garbled, unfortunately.
Is it still gargled, Robin?
There you go. There you go.
I had to literally walk outside because our internet is out and we have horrible cell phone service here. So I had a very similar situation that ended a completely different way the other day when I was in Ross, and it happened to be two women who were shopping, and they're like me, apparently they love the clearance rack. So I was just waiting patiently beside them, and I kept looking at the one because she looked so familiar, but they both had face masks on. And then she turned around and she was talking about a dress, and she's like, I just don't know if I like this. Is it see-through? And I said, well, and I just looked at her. I said, well, I didn't know who it was. I said, hold it up to the light. I'll tell you if it's see-through. And I was like, nope, you're good. And she's like, thank you. And then I looked at her straight in the eyes and I realized who it was. It was a woman who I know from a couple of things in town. And so it was the exact same situation with a different ending. And I think it's just so important to go back to what Tim said and what, you know, Tim and Isaac and all of us have talked about before, is that hurt people hurt other people, right? People that are hurting for one reason or another often will lash out at other people, whether it's intentional or not. And in that case, I would say that's just something where if that's not a situation where you're willing to make that connection there, to just do, you know, I'm kind of the opposite of Isaac. I'm a very extroverted introvert. Introversion is how I am the majority of the time. And I'm kind of like Isaac in that when I go shopping, I want to just go shopping and get out. Except for sometimes I see someone that I feel like I should make a connection with, or if I see someone that they look like they're having a bad day, I just smile at them and say, you know, I hope your day gets better. And so I think it really is so situational. So, you know, in your case, Deanne, I don't know that I would have done anything different depending on the mindset that you were in. 5 years ago, I would have done exactly what you did. Today, I may have said, I'm sorry if I offended you. I'm just waiting to pick up some aluminum foil because I'm out. Can I please sneak by you and then I'll get out of your way? But some days we are, as human beings, not in a place that we can be receptive to that because of our own lives, or in a place where we can say something calmly instead of getting defensive. I mean, if you ask anyone who knows me well, 75% of the time, I'm a very chill out individual. 25% of the time, if something gets said wrong to me and I'm in the wrong state of mind, like, you're going to get really nice, Kaylee, or you're going to get Medusa, and there's oftentimes no in between. So kudos to you for realizing that that wasn't a conversation that you were maybe capable of having in that moment because you were so taken aback. There's nothing wrong with that.
And the other thing to think about, Deanne, is that it's very possible that 5 years or even a year ago, that you would have thought twice about their reaction. That it would have been a completely, that, see, you're analyzing yourself, you're thinking about, what did I do? Which I think Tim pointed out, that's the start. Even in situations like that seem so benign, we are really, really thinking about. So that's part of our growth, because it's possible that not that long ago that interaction, you wouldn't have cared that they were mad that you were, or upset that you know, or your reaction could have been really negative. You could have actually said something. So that's part of the reason we're here, is sort of go over those things. So anyone else?
There's a question in chat from Jennifer. How should white people handle racial insults towards them?
For example,
Yeah, I'd love an example.
Hey, this is Jennifer. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I think that the guilt maybe plays into, I'm struggling with white fragility. I think the guilt plays in here where I can justify, I have had some insult. I get called a poofy, a white girl. I've been called that several times. And I think it is, I can examine how I've acted, but some of it is also, I think, the way that I look. And it makes me feel like I just have to kind of accept that because I'm carrying guilt. I know that the people that have called me that have probably had really bad interactions with white people and have put me in the same boat. So it's like I'm carrying guilt for things that happened in history or other members of my race. And I just wanted to know if how the best way to handle that would be.
Well, what do you do now when that happens? Like when you get, what was that word, Jennifer? Poofy?
It's a cuss word in there, but a poofy,
oh, okay.
ASS,
Okay.
white girl.
So, yeah, so, and then I understand, then what do you do in the situation?
Well, I think I've learned some of it, me being young and shy. I think that could have come across as snobby. I've tried to be a more down-to-earth person and relate to people on a personal level, like you were saying earlier, finding that common ground. But it still sometimes feels like an instance where I just have to shut up.
She's also
not saying anything.
Blonde and Southern, not that may have any play into that as well.
I think all people of color can discriminate against other people, and be prejudiced against other people. And yet, as a white person, I can only think of one time in my life where I was truly afraid and I felt attacked and I felt I was in Chicago and I was on a city bus and there were a lot of young people. I was with my son and I was really scared, and I've talked about that, and my son was scared, and I think the people wanted to scare us, so I think that was accomplished. But then I think about it, and they were Black young men. I think they live that way every day.
Yeah.
My experience one time with 61 years on the planet, they probably experience almost every day of their life wherever they go, if they're not hanging out with their group or their friends. And so I know that where I'm going with this, Jennifer, I have no doubt that we get it. And yet the balance of that seems really historically out of whack, if that makes any sense. I like what you and Deanne are both doing. You're brave enough to ask the questions and put that thought out there so we can have conversations about it. And I'm curious again to hear what Isaac would say. The worst thing I think we can do is not to take advantage of these type of forums and communication. So what Deanne did and what you're doing, Jennifer, this is how we're leaning in, we're opening the door, we're learning, we're growing, we're starting to pay attention. And hopefully—
I do want to say I appreciate this a lot, because that is something I felt so uncomfortable talking about or asking about, but like I'm dying to figure out the right way to navigate and to understand more. So I appreciate this.
So,
and I feel very uncomfortable right now.
You're in the right feeling then. That's a good place to be. Can I go, Tim?
Yeah, I'm going to just say one thing, and then I'll pass it on to Isaac real quick. So yeah, as we said earlier, you don't do this without being uncomfortable. Towards the very end, if we haven't given you some things to do, make sure that you ask for those action steps, and we're going to provide those at the end, that you can have some real tangible ways to move forward into these conversations. Thank you both. Isaac?
Yeah, Jennifer, I love this question and this scenario. I think it's so important, and probably something that is going to resonate with so many other people on this call, and I'm glad that I get a chance to speak to it. First, I think that just for this question and several others that are probably going to come up or be thought about and maybe not even mentioned, we need to look at it in two different ways. I want to make sure that we don't mash these two conversations together, because they're very different. So first off, I think it's important to take them one at a time. When we're talking about white fragility, that feeling that comes up of, okay, I'm being defensive, or I'm being a certain way because I'm rebuking the fact that I'm racist, or I'm rebuking the fact that I feel a certain way about this, without just saying, okay, I'll take that, I got it. But I think that's one conversation. But the second one is what you just brought up, and I don't think that they necessarily go together. I don't think that you should bring hate and give hate. So what I mean by that is, if anyone is disrespecting us, I think that that's not okay. So if someone is saying something to you and it's tearing you down or it's hurting your feelings, that person is in the wrong, period. Whether you or someone else thinks that they're doing it to take on, or doing it to they're projecting because they're hurt, because of guilt, or because of shame, or because they're hurt or whatever, I think that in that process, understanding maybe why they're doing it is important in there, but also in the process, and this is my opinion on things, is not accepting it. I don't think it's okay to accept and validate that someone's tearing you down and saying negative things about you. So if they are doing it and they're calling you that name, know that that's wrong. That's wrong every single time. 100% of the time, them calling you names is wrong. If you didn't do anything to provoke that, it's wrong, period. So I just want to make sure we're kind of talking about that. It's separate, but it's also together. But like, I think there's an understanding of why they're saying it, but it's also like not okay. No, it's not okay that they're saying that. And however you want to handle that, I just need you to know, like, even if you do have guilt, I do think a little bit of guilt could potentially be good in the journey to acceptance and healing. But I don't feel as if you should be like, okay, I'm guilty in this because I'm of the white race and we've done so many things. You're angry because of that. I'm going to take that. I think understanding it, but not taking it. And I hope that I explained that in a right way. Pretty much saying, stand up for yourself. Don't let those things happen to you, but also knowing that it comes from a place, and the understanding for you is very, very important, where you don't have to like, I'm just going to take this because I know why you're feeling that way. I don't think that people should take those kinds of things.
And so this is what's fun about doing this work. I look at it a little bit different. I don't know that you have to.
Love to hear it.
Yeah, so I don't know that you have to take it, but what if we seek to understand it? I'm going to guess, Isaac, just because you've been Black, you've had stuff come to you in all sorts of ways that you didn't warrant. The way people think people have said things to you, mistreated you, and I would guess most of the time, because I know you well, you know it's not even about you. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes, so I wonder if we can do that same thing and realize, what if it was because, Jennifer, because you're a white woman and what white represents to you could be oftentimes what Black represents to other people. And so we just make all these false assumptions about people. And so I really like to give people grace and understanding and the benefit of the doubt. And yet I'm with Isaac. I'm not going to let somebody hurt me or my love with my family, my home, my dogs, you know. But I always try to find some way to somehow, and I've got some age on me, try to find some way to create connection. Because as Isaac said earlier, the stuff that people are leading with, that's really not even who we are. And it's easy to push people away. So my question to both you, myself, Deanne earlier, so what can we do to create a connection out of those really tough challenges? Like, it's easy for me to become defensive and to put people in place. And I don't know if that's always the best thing for me to do. And yet, so yeah, I'm just saying there's more than one way to deal with this.
Yeah, definitely is.
And what will you do differently when you're called that cuss word with that other word in the future? And you might not even have to do anything differently with those people, but what will you do differently in your own mind and your own heart? And Jennifer?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I wonder if Jennifer can respond first. Jennifer, what might you do differently?
I think just internally recognizing that it comes more from the other person's experience, and not allowing myself to be disrespected, but also not taking on part of that name or the guilt that could be associated with it.
You understand? If you do that, how amazing that will be for you? That's called guilt, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what's that do to your level of peace, your level of happiness, your level of engagement in the world? Yeah, you got it. Good job.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good, just to bring it up and want to be able to walk that fine line. I think that's the biggest thing, is showing up and asking that question and listening and hearing feedback and whatnot. So yeah, you got it, girl.
So Jennifer, for the rest of us poofy ass white women, I'm sorry that you're having to take on that for all of us. But it sounds to me like you're handling it quite well.
Thanks, Robin.
We have another question. I hear somebody in. Do you have a question or a comment?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, you can hear me. I've been trying to go off mute for a while.
Yeah.
So as a Black man, I completely agree with what Isaac was saying in regards to that Jennifer should not take that, right? Because it goes back to what Tim said in the sense of leaning into such situations, trying to find a connection. But again, as a Black man, you're right, there needs to be grace, but at the same time, what it is that we're looking for, being equality, doesn't mean that we can dish whatever to folks on the other side, right? Because it sets the wrong tone, and it doesn't create a conducive environment where we can begin to unify. And back to what Isaac was saying, it's a way in which to do it, Jennifer, but at the same time, being silent in that moment is just like being silent in a moment if you're around those who look like you, who make racial comments, right? It's not what you say, it's what you tolerate. So you definitely have to take a stand there. There's a judicious way to do it, but I think that helps to create that connection to close that racial divide that we're working to galvanize over right now. So I agree with what was said. Definitely have to take a stand, do it the right way. but it will make it better by taking a stand and allowing them to hear you out, which ultimately will allow you to be able to hear them out as well on why they even responded the way they did.
I think that's valuable. Thank you.
Yeah. Who's the gentleman that just got done speaking? What's your name?
Anthony Woodson.
Anthony, thank you for sharing, and thank you for your insight and guidance. And I love your approach to this work, that we're all in it together. So, and not to remain silent is what I also heard you say. So thank you so much, and
Yeah.
look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.
Thank you guys for what you're doing.
Together. Thank you.
Is there anything else? This has been a fantastic
Great feedback.
conversation. We can keep going on this, or we can move on with some other questions that we have in regards to the book.
I think ultimately for me, Robin, it comes down to, and very much what Isaac and Anthony both said, because I know them outside of this. Isaac, what more so than Anthony, because Anthony I met through a Courageous Conversations thing that Berenger did. And I know he and his wife are both here, but Isaac and I have had conversations about this in Instagram chats as well. And it so depends on the person and the relationship you have with that person, or a lack thereof. Because, you know, I discussed with Isaac when we were talking about, I think it was about a month ago, and just the current climate overall in this country. I mean, you have the political climate, the racial climate, the COVID climate, the mask, no mask climate, all of these different things compounding with police brutality and all of these different things. And it really depends upon the person. So let's say that I make a comment and Isaac or Anthony comes to me and says, I don't know if you realize, but there was a little bit of racism in there, or there was a little bit of white fragility in there. I'm going to take that in a manner that I want to know more, because I want to know what it is that I did, right? What it is that I said. Was it the tone? Was it the words that I used? Was it that I talked with my hands? Because every person is so individual and unique in how they talk and the words that they say. Is English their first language, their second, their third language? I mean, all those things, your vocabulary, your education, your socioeconomic background of each of the people in that conversation. Whereas if I'll say former friend, a former acquaintance of mine, who also happened to be a Black individual, she likes to bully people, but come off as trying to help. And so had she said that, I would have taken it completely differently. I would have gotten defensive, because I know her character as a human being. Whereas my friend Alicia, who also happens to be Black, I would have taken it the same way as if Anthony or Isaac would have said it. You really just have to understand that not everyone on either side, Black, white, anywhere in the middle, in terms of the spectrum of left or right, or the color of your skin or your background, not everyone is out to get everyone or you specifically, but there are some people who, I don't know how, they get enjoyment out of bringing others discomfort, and they get enjoyment out of criticizing others, whether there is or is not a just reason for doing it. And so that's something that's why I love these conversations, because I met Anthony through those, I met Isaac through those, Celeste was here last time, you know, who all happen to be people of color, but also just amazing human beings. There are horrible human beings of every race, color, socioeconomic class, and political party. That's the truth of it. And that's something you have to remember going into any conversation, specifically with someone that you don't know.
Yep. That's such an excellent point. I think part of what we're trying to get here is that these are conversations we need to start having. And when you know your audience, when you know who it is that when you're starting to have these conversations with, you know how to approach it. You know that it would be okay to go to Isaac and say, hey, I just want better understanding. Maybe there's something specific about the Black culture that did you have a question for him about, but you don't know how to ask it, because you don't want Isaac to think, well, and we know Isaac is like, it's going to come off as racist if I ask the question a certain way. And so you don't know, do I even ask the question, or don't ask the question, or talk about that, or don't. But I think Kaylee, you're spot on in that you have to know your audience. You have to know how to approach these things, and you're going to be at different levels along the spectrum with different people. Someone you just brand new meet, the conversation is going to be completely different, even as you're trying to get toward anti-racist behavior, than they are with Isaac or someone that you've known your entire life. It's still important to have those conversations, but you're going to be coming at it from a different spot along the spectrum, along the line.
So,
And there, you know, you also have to realize not every person of color wants to answer every person's question, right? There are phenomenal human beings like Isaac and many other friends of mine that I have that happen to be people of color that are very open, and they openly say, come to me with your questions. I want to help you understand, or I want to give you some history, you know, of our culture in the United States or our people. But there are also some people that don't want to do that. And ultimately that's not every Black person's job to educate non-Black people. But there are amazing human beings like Isaac and Anthony and Celeste and many others who are so open to it. So preface your question with that. Hey, if it's okay, I would like to ask you this question around race, culture, or around X, Y, or Z, and give them the opportunity to not answer your question. And if they don't take it personally. Go find someone else like Isaac or many others who are willing to do it and take the time, effort, and energy to do that for us.
So that's exactly what Dr. DiAngelo is asking all of us to do. He's asking us to, especially when the situations don't go the way we want, to don't let circumstances, don't let other situations outside of your control impact how you respond. You get to decide that. But she says, most people, probably 97% or more, said most times we act defensively. And she says we have another option inside of it. So no matter if I know someone real well or not, at the end of the day, I get the final vote. You get the final vote on what you do and how you responded. So she wants to heighten our awareness. And part of how we'll end this is to share I'll give an example now. Instead of being defensive, what if we're actually grateful? She talks about this huge paradigm shift. What if being angry? What if we could be humbled? So what we do have control over is not the situation, but we all have control over how we respond. And she's saying, first as white people, we just got to stop being defensive and overprotective. And then I agree with what Jennifer was saying. It's so hard right now. Like, I feel as a white guy, I'm pretty comfortable inside my skin. And so actually, Anthony and Isaac, I'd like you to even respond to this. So I'm almost hypersensitive now when I'm out in public, when I walk past African-American people, and especially, it seems more men than others. And typically I just greet people, but there's almost like, I'm kind of like checking myself. Am I saying the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? It's like the conversations have been so heated and so elevated. And I love people. I like connecting. I almost wonder if I'm like, there's something that I'm even oversensitive to how to connect with people. And
I think it's all in how you channel that hypersensitivity, right? So if that hypersensitivity causes you to check yourself, that's likely a good thing because we can never be too cautious in the environment for which we're in. But if that hypersensitivity causes you to be buttoned up to the point where you're almost fearful to talk to anyone who doesn't look like you, then it does the opposite, right? But I think as we talked earlier about grace, that grace goes both ways, right? So as for me, to Kaylee's point about being approachable on someone who doesn't look like me coming to a conversation to try to increase their understanding. Even if I don't want to have that conversation, understanding that this person has overcome that fear to even be willing to engage, I feel like it really is my responsibility to then lend not only my advice and my insight as a Black man, but to be willing to listen to their side as well, because again, it's less about a race issue as it is a humanity issue, and the divide is the lack of understanding between us because many folks are too scared to have the conversation. When I say many folks, I'm talking about Black and white people alike. So it's having that grace, to Kaylee's point of, hey, look, I may be having a crappy day and I don't want to talk to anybody about this today, but I have to recognize the fact that this person was willing to come to me to even engage in this conversation. So I need to exercise some of that grace that I'm looking for and be willing to engage them and help to educate, the same as I'm looking for them to help educate me, to give me a perspective that I don't have as a Black man, right? Because that's the only way that we overcome this injustice, this systemic racism that we're experiencing right now, is shared perspective of which we can then build action off of.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't have much to add to that because that was perfectly said, and what Anthony's saying is so right. And that's what I was trying to say earlier is, you know, I do think it's amazing that in every circumstance we understand maybe what the other person's coming from, but also don't take it personal, because when we do have situations where someone lashes out at us or is angry at us or whatever, it's a lot of times how they are in that moment instead of how we are. So as we're going through that, like, we can understand, here's their hurt, here's their pain, maybe this is where it comes from, but just on a respect level and on a humanity level, like Anthony said, no one's going to disrespect me. And so however you want to take that, that can be answered and that could be handled in whatever way that takes. And so I think as we're doing this work and we're opening up our hearts and we're feeling this instead of trying to comprehend it up here, we can start to open up our hearts and understand that everyone's a human, everyone wants connection, everyone wants to get this thing right. But there's some that do want to connect with everyone, and there's some that don't want to connect with the other side. And you need to figure out what side that is, because there are some white people who don't want to connect with Black people. It just is what it is. And there are some Black people who are jaded from their experience and don't want to connect with white people in that way. And we need to figure out in that moment which one it is. And so in those scenarios, if you're getting that, I'm against taking it, but I am very, very much for understanding and empathy and trying to connect if you can, and showing love regardless, because that's going to be a better representation of you. And if you are just taking it, that stereotype of Black people is eventually going to come in your mind of like, you know what? I keep taking this, I keep getting this from these Black people that I run into. This is actually how they are. And that's going to make you even more jaded towards the Black community and divide us even more. So those are my thoughts. Really a summation of what you guys have said.
Right on.
I think it's important that we approach this as, you know, we're all on a developmental learning spectrum, and that we don't look at this as though we're going to get it all right and perfect, but that there's opportunities for learning and growth continually throughout, as we move on. And so, I by no means do all this right or understand, but as I've spent more time reading this book, one of the things that I've kind of thought is that, as we look at and think about the situations that we have experienced, if we're overly critical, like, well, what did I do and how was I or whatever, one of the things that I thought is like, wait, it's putting it back on me. Like, I'm the person who has the problem or, whatever. And I'm not recognizing that, no, this problem is because, racism exists. It's not me. I'm not slighted. I'm not, all of these things in those situations. I need to understand and separate the situation from like the emotion and whatever that maybe I've experienced. And so it's really it's helped me to frame and understand that, I don't want to automatically go to hurt, ashamed, those feelings, because then I take the attention away from what the true issue is. And the issue is not, that I feel bad because I was called out or, somebody recognized that I didn't do something or say something the right way. And so I've been so much more mindful of that as I've gotten into the later chapters of this book, and just recognizing that I can take away from the cause in which I am fighting if I go back to how I'm feeling after situations. And so that's kind of one of the things that I've thought about. But just to follow up too, one of the first studies that I did was But I'm Not Racist by Kathy Obear. And one of the things in that book that really, kind of stuck with me was not expecting people of color to teach me about their experiences. it's my job as a white person to go out and to learn and to understand and to gauge in order to really move towards being a true ally. So just trying to take myself out of the situation as it being personal and all of those things. And so, you know, I would encourage, like, that's just how I'm trying to reframe my understanding and my experiences, and just to help people to understand that too, because, you know, for every one time somebody said something to me about maybe how I acted or, you know, whatever in a situation or talked, a person of color has experienced that 100 times over in situations they've been in. So I don't know, that's just my opinion and 2 cents on what I've been experiencing as I've been learning.
I mean, I think you hit it right. It's like you're taking exactly what it is that Dr. DiAngelo is wanting us to get. It's not comfortable, and we are already, one of the things, and I listened to a podcast that Dr. DiAngelo did, and she's talking about the fact that we're all swimming. We're all in the river swimming. We, as white people, are swimming with the current. We're born that way. We get to swim with the current. People of color are born with the reality that they will be swimming against the current right from the beginning. And so, I mean, that's that, you know, the reality is that what we need to do is obviously is to understand that and know that the discomfort is going to come with it. Dr. DiAngelo says she's been doing this for years. She still has her moments. She says, there'll be moments. I'm never going to be someone who says the N-word, but I still have I have those moments when a completely racist thought comes into my head. That still happens. So I still know that I'm always going to be growing, that there's always going to be work.
Yeah, it's lifelong work. Tamara, am I saying your name right? Is it Tamara or Tamara?
Tamara.
Tamara?
I answer to a lot of things. It's Tamara.
I just want to comment on a comment that you made, and I'm going to paraphrase it. Let's see if I got it right. So what I think I heard you saying is that when you get locked into your fragility, or when we do, at the end of the day, it impedes us from having the conversations we need to have. It stops us from developing the relationships we need to have. So what a great takeaway for you to grasp, and then to share that and to remind us of that. I think she speaks of that frequently, and that, I think that's exactly what happens. And then, so we just keep doing what we're doing, and that's not working. So thank you. Was that close? Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Probably much more eloquently than what I said, but I tell
no.
you what, this book is life-changing. It truly has been, it's a phenomenal read. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Great conversations. Guys, I don't even know where now I try to fit us back into, not that we really had a script, but, you know, we did have some certain things that we for sure wanted to cover. So,
Hey, Robin, I've got an idea.
Okay.
So we only have a little bit over half an hour left, and just for the audience participants, so we have a whole series of questions. But if they have questions that any of the audience has, or if they have comments, we can go that way as well.
Yeah, this conversation's awesome. If you guys want to ask it or put it in the chat, I guess. If no one has one right now, we can continue, and you put it in the chat, and after we're done, we can discuss that question.
I got a question for Anthony. Anthony, are you there? Is he there?
Yes, I'm here.
So you, I've never met you, and I'm kind of feeling like I know you already. You mentioned that we're all part of the human race. How can we all help each other embrace that idea?
Well, I mean,
without dismissing the 400 years of oppression that Black people and people of color have had to deal with, and current racism. And so, like, I believe that, but I don't think people are treated that way. I'm curious about your thoughts.
yeah, that's That's a loaded question there, Tim. But truthfully, the way we get over it is exactly what we're doing today. Having these type of conversations, like literally, again, this shared perspective, and Isaac touched on it earlier, having conversations like this during tense times like this allow us to connect on a common denominator in the sense of we all have humanity. When we see someone killed or shot unjustly, that's all that should matter. It doesn't have to matter what color the person was that got shot. It happens to be us as Black folks who are getting killed at a ridiculous rate by law enforcement. But the reality of the matter is to see someone with a knee on their head or their neck, or to see a guy get shot in his back 7 times, I don't have to be Black to feel in that situation, right?
Right.
It hurts me, whether I'm Black or not, to know that his kids were in the car and what his family must be feeling and why did that happen? I think that's the thing is, you guys mentioned media earlier. The media does a great job of deceiving us, and we often take the bait. And we don't even realize that we take the bait because we allow race to come into things. Now, we realize the disproportionate numbers, but what we don't realize is we don't need race to necessarily get the solutions. We know what the target of the solutions are, but I think if we take race out of it and focus on the emotion and the care of being a human and seeing others done wrong, that's the part of it. It's having the conversation, because I always hear people say, what's the next steps? What actions are we going to take? And I always shake my head because it's like we're putting the cart before the horse. We're not used to having these type of conversations first and foremost. So how can we begin to talk about solutions? Solutions come from co-creation and mind melding. We can only do that if we talk. I think now with the George Floyd situation is different, where we've had the opportunity to have these types of platforms. As Kaylee mentioned earlier, within our pharmaceutical company, we're having these race conversations. We see avenues opening up for us to bridge the gap. So I think that's the beginning part, is getting comfortable with the conversations, of which then we can build solutions.
Or being uncomfortable, but keep having them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because look, when you initially stretch a muscle that you haven't stretched, it's uncomfortable until you do it for a while. And then all of a sudden it becomes second nature. It's the same exact thing here. You do it enough until you overcome the uncomfortable, where now it's comfortable and actually it benefits you.
What a great analogy.
Comments, questions? You got it, Robin.
Hi, I wanted to ask a question. This is Amy. Can you hear me?
Yep. Hi, Amy.
Okay. So in the South, sometimes I think we're conditioned a little differently to be afraid. Maybe being a woman, you're conditioned to be afraid, but it's afraid of certain circumstances.
It's garbling.
And it's not a color thing. So, but sorry. Okay. I don't know what to do to make it better. Tell me.
Just like that. You're good.
Okay. So my question is, I have friends who have benefited from being white, but they know that George Floyd was wrong. They know that it's wrong that people are treated unjustly, but their words are not coming out correctly. Like if you have a conversation with them, you sort of twinge because what's coming out is insensitive. How can we help people who are insensitive?
So I've got a quick response, then I'd like to hear other people. So, and I think Anthony and Isaac both have spoke to this, and I don't think we can remain silent, and that's what she's saying throughout the book too. We can't, if we remain silent, Amy, then we'll get what we've got, and that I don't think that's even status quo. Things even get worse. So I think we have to find some way to, we don't have to call people out. I like the word nudge, We have to find an entry point. And like Kaylee said, it's easier when we know people and we have developed relationships. But at the same time, I think if we see something and hear something, I think we have a responsibility, if we want things to be different, to say things different. And most people, with a little bit of work, we can do that with tact, and we can do that in a respectful way. So I don't know if your friends have the awareness that they're missing it, or I don't know if they want to change, if they have any desire to change. So let's say I'm you. I might do something like this. Hey, can I give you some feedback? Or do you realize when you say this is what it makes me feel like? Then you own what it does to you, and then begin to have that conversation. So the worst thing I would say is don't be silent. Find a way to give a nudge. Let them know that you're doing it because you're doing it out of care, and then speak clearly and tell them what you've heard. And I think words have impact, and words influence people, and words can hurt people or they can lift people up. And that's my thought. So I think you're on to something. The very fact you asked the question, and it's probably a question a lot of people have. So I'm going to encourage people not just to, if we see something, say something. The last part's do something. So find some way to give a nudge would be my thought. And then that's just the beginning of that conversation, especially if it's ongoing with people that you know. And then when you see change, give them some feedback and let them know. And
it's so much easier to do in person. I'm looking at the comment in chat, and I saw this too, the social media argument today, this sort of a stop shooting us, and someone else then saying, stop giving us reason to. It's become, it's the us now and them instead of taking this all as a societal issue. And I don't know how to, listening to how you responded, Tim, and that answer, and how to talk with your friends and that nudge. And I tell you, we had this you and I had this conversation. You say nudge, I say call them out. I'm a little more blunt about it. I know maybe nudge gets.
No, that's our personalities.
Yeah, you get more with honey. You get more with the nudge than you do with the shove. I don't know, but that's certainly that's what we keep continuing to see, is all of this. Whenever something happens, it just is becoming so much well, you don't do this, and then this won't happen. And it's just, I don't know, how do we get that connectivity back? Or maybe we don't. For some folks, it maybe there is in some situations where we're just going to have to stop trying with certain people. I don't know. What do you think about that, Isaac or Tim?
I'll go, and then I'll hand it off to Isaac. Isaac said this earlier, and I'm paraphrasing. He said, with all of our differences, we are way more alike. And at the end of the day, we love our family. We want to put food on the table. We want to find something with passion. And so I think we're much more alike than different. I've got additional thoughts, but Isaac, what would you like to say?
And we are, but do we just continue to just keep saying that over and over again to people? Do you realize what you're saying is, 90, what did we decide at the last conversation? 99% of our DNA is the same?
Yep. This is such an easier answer than it is to actually do, and it's just what we've been talking about. It's just having the conversation.
Yeah.
It's a phone call, it's a Zoom call, it is a face-to-face conversation where we get a chance to actually talk about our sides and talk about our points so things can be hashed out. Unfortunately, we're stuck in everything being so polarized. It's left, it's right. There's two sides. There's not multiple thoughts on this, unfortunately. And like Anthony said, we are really being duped by our political talking points and media and social media. It's If you don't agree with exactly what I say, then you're wrong.
Yeah.
You're my enemy. We aren't friends anymore. And so I'll say, when you're having those conversations, it gets so much easier with each rung you climb on having a connection and a relationship with someone. If I have a friend who's saying all kinds of outlandish stuff on social media, I can more easily call them out in a personal way, not just with everyone to see, easier if I have a relationship. If I don't have a relationship and we're down here, there's a 0% chance of that person caring what I say. So I think first off, we need to save our energy and pick our battles. I think everyone on this call is an ally, or you wouldn't be here. And so this is a battle. This is a war that we're in, whether you think so or not. And we need to save our energies for the people who can be swayed, but less than that, the people who want to be swayed. So I would say definitely in those situations, don't be silent. I think that if you are around someone, they say something, especially if it's a white friend and you're white and it offends you, then it's definitely going to offend a person of color. So be the first line to help them through that, because I promise it'll come easier from you than a person of color they don't have a relationship with. So yeah, just have it and give them the benefit of the doubt and give them the opportunity to change, to say, oh, I didn't understand that, or to get white fragility and you talk them through that.
Yep.
Not everyone's going to get it the first time, the second time. When we have a child, we don't just say, well, you tried twice, you're out of here, you can't walk now. We have to coax people through it if we have the patience for that. But also it's just planting a seed as well. It doesn't always have to just be us. Maybe we said something and then someone else will say something to them if they say it again. Or maybe we were the fifth nudge and four other people already nudged them, and now it's coming from us and we're closer and now they get it. So I think it's always important to speak up. I think it's so much easier if you have a relationship and you're close to somebody. And then I think it's also important to do it immediately, because if you do a, hey, Kyle, you said this 2 weeks ago, and he's going to be like, what? Like, why are you telling me this now? And that's not going to go over correctly. So I think it has to happen in the moment with the relationship, with grace and humility.
The big words of the day, grace and humility. We say that a lot.
Always. No room for ego.
And what if a part of this isn't always speaking up, but also listening up? What if we listen more? We're just really listen more. Typically when people feel heard, even if we don't agree with them, it builds connection. And so what if we can give up the need to be right, listen more, strive for connection. By the way, almost every leadership program I've ever done, I always put people together that don't know each other. And within moments, they feel like they've known each other their whole life because they've found something to connect on, whether it's children, family, work, passions. There's something profound that happens when we really listen and strive for connection. And then as we develop trust, I think, and people take risk and begin to open up and share more of their own story, oftentimes that's where empathy comes in and compassion comes in. And it's kind of hard to hurt people that you care about and like. What are the thoughts from participants, comments, questions?
I think just one thing to follow up on, on what you and Isaac said, I think to go back to the individual relationships, you have to talk to someone the way that they are going to understand it, not the way that you understood it, right? So Tim and I are very similar in many ways. We're very different in many ways. Deb and I, the same thing. Isaac and I, the same. We have our similarities and our differences in our upbringing. And ultimately, every human being's prior experiences shape their reality. They don't shape reality, but they shape reality for that person. And so a great example of that is, what terms are you using when you come to someone to have that discussion? Prime example, Tim has said this many times, so I don't feel bad saying it. Like Tim said, the first time that he heard white privilege, it offended him. The first time I heard the term white fragility, it offended me. And I spoke about that with a friend of mine who happens to be female and Black, and we talked it out. And I said, what is this? Like, this is very offensive to me as a white individual who has conversations conversations and tough conversations frequently. I have my whole life. And she explained to me she said, it's like, you can't take white and for coin term. And so if you're going to talk to somebody about white fragility, white privilege, white supremacy, that term means. And when I had an understanding of what that meant, I said, yeah, that makes sense. There are so many white people who have white fragility, a coined term. And she said to me, she's like, I see, you know, as a Black woman, she said to me, a white woman, I see how that was offensive to you, because clearly since the age of 15, you have not had white fragility, right? You don't shy away from a conversation that is Black or white, right versus wrong, left versus right. But many people are not like that. The vast majority of people are not like the people on this call who actively, cognitively think about what they say and how it came off to someone else. And you really have to remember that when talking to someone who specifically doesn't understand what white fragility or white supremacy or, you know, redlining or any of these different topics are, because if they don't have a fundamental understanding of what you're trying to tell them, they are going to get defensive immediately. And I think that's something that we all have to remember. I can talk to my mom about anything, right? When I first approached a man who went to the same college as me, that I never went to college with, who happens to be a Black male, and I had a question for him, I sent him a voice message so that he could hear the sincerity and the empathy and the concern in my voice. And I said, I have a question, if you're willing, because he happens to be a police officer. If you're willing, could you please explain this to me? And he's, you know, shot back the same thing that Isaac always does. Absolutely. What's your question? So just really keep that in mind as you go forward and you are an upstander and you are an ally in this movement and in this battle, because it is a battle. It is a battle for those of us who are white trying to help the cause and help our friends. And it is a huge battle for anyone who is not white. It's such a bigger battle because they live with it every day. And you're not going to help that battle by instantly offending someone with a specific coin term that they don't understand the fundamental parts.
I share something to kind of go off of that for this next piece of learning. So as we're talking about white fragility, I think it's very important that we talk about the term and definition of racism. And so just by definition, racism usually is as bad things are done by bad people to hurt people because of race. And I think that is a simplistic way. And if we go about it like that, I don't think we're ever going to solve it. I think that personally, and I know my other panelists will say this, we love the definition of racism from the confounds of what Dr. Robin DiAngelo says, and from, oh my gosh, I just forgot his name, Ibram X. Kendi, the last book that we read. And so I have it written down here. Robin DiAngelo mentions racism being more of a system than a slur. It's prejudice plus power, which is racism, and the power that keeps a certain group or groups lesser than based on that privilege or that prejudice. And so multiple times I think they have to be buddies, because Dr. DiAngelo mentioned Ibram in the book and his definition. And if you guys haven't read it, this is the book that we did the study on last time, How to Be an Antiracist by Ibram X. Kendi. That's a great book. It's so good. And then this is another one. This is my wife's book, Stamped from the Beginning. And those are two great books if you want to continue your learning on past the book, White Fragility. And Kendi's definition is one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inactions or expressing a racist idea. And so I do think the concept of white fragility comes about because we're offended because we're not racist. Robin DiAngelo gets into this concept of good, bad binary, meaning, you know, I'm not a bad person. Bad people are those racists that, you know, the white nationalists who marched at Charlottesville, Virginia, you know, the bad people who were going, you know, hanging, lynching people who had slaves. All those people are bad. I'm not that, so that means I'm good. That's the good, bad binary. There's no in between. You're here or you're here. And I think we really need to rebuke that, as she was saying, that there's a lot of gray area in there. And you can be racist in one moment, and then the next moment be anti-racist. That's what Kendi says, and she confirms that as well. It's not a pejorative, it's not an insult, it's not a dig at you, it's just an action that you did to maybe support a racial institute, or you said something racist. Doesn't mean you are a racist, it means you did something racist. So I think we need to know that, and I think understanding the definitions of those will help minimize that white fragility a little bit as we're going through that. But yes, if you guys don't have another book, and I don't think we've decided on one yet, How to Be an Anti-Racist. If you have Audible, it's awesome to listen to because Kendi actually reads it himself. But so many definitions of racism, and I think those two are the best.
Yeah, and so what they both do, they get it away from individual actions, and we focus more on policies and that can create change. So even like when you vote coming up here in November, he would encourage you to vote anti-racist, and you get to decide what that is. And actually you don't get to decide. So this is how you decide. If the policies include people, then you're, and doesn't discriminate, then you're anti-racist. If they discriminate, then that would be his definition of racist. And like Isaac said, it's you're not either or, but that it's a dynamic process, and you can flip back on that based upon your actions and ideas and how you vote and how you support policies.
Yeah, so it's thinking about voting. I mean, when we talked about that last time, and I don't know if a lot of people, this election is going to be really important, and it's the time, and we probably always should do this, think about voting, not necessarily in what's going to benefit me personally the most, but when you think about those anti-racist policies and how much we're striving to move toward being anti-racist, you really have to think about, and it's not just the people that you're voting for, it's the issues that come up on the ballot as well. It's other things that you just support, not just voting, but it's other policies that certain organizations have. I mean, I even think about this with libraries, which you would think, well, I can't imagine that they would be some policies that the library director would have to think about whether or not it was racist or anti-racist. But there are. If you really take and delve into some of your patron use policies, the behavior policies, there certainly are some things that really need to be looked at in every area, and not just voting. Guidelines and policies are critical as we move toward becoming anti-racist.
I have another concept in her book I'd just like to remind people of or throw out, and then see what your thoughts are. And really I'd like to hear from some participants. So in the book, she talks about color blindness. And so how color blindness would be, as white people would say, I don't see color. And so I've heard that from, gosh, people since I've been leading those workshops for 20, 30 years. I hear that all the time. I heard it recently as last week. And in the military, oftentimes, well, I'll hear people say, I just see green, I don't see color. I didn't know the history of where that phrase came from, but it came from during the civil rights movement. And we all know Martin Luther's memorable and historic speech, I Have a Dream. So in there's the line, and I'm paraphrasing, I have a dream that someday men will be judged on the content of their character versus the color of their skin. And after that pivotal speech, people began to say across the nation, they knew that it was wrong to judge people on color. So they would start to say that they were colorblind. And yet my friends of color and my Black friends, they want to be recognized as Black men and Black women that are beautiful, and my Asian friends and Hispanic friends, and so they want to be seen as their color. So just a thought, if you ever find yourself saying that you're colorblind, like there's people that I look up to that I've heard them say that, I've just had to give them a nudge and say, hey, guess what? Did you know that could be racist? And they're not well-intended people can create harm without knowing it. So we have to give people nudges. But that's just kind of some of the history on that. I don't know if there's any.
And that's such a teaching moment right there, Tim.
Yeah.
That's that nudge. That would be more of a nudge sort of scenario than a calling out scenario, because that in their mind, what they're saying is something that seems completely benign.
Right.
I heard a leader recently say that about in the military, and not only did it refer to people of color, but also gender, but I just see green. And it was a woman who's African American. She says, well, hello, I want to be seen as a woman, and I want to be seen as a beautiful African American woman. Please see me for who I am.
Mm-hmm. I think, that's a great point, and something that I've learned recently. And in working with my students, one of the things, that I've brought up, I will sometimes phrase it with, you know what I just learned? Or I read this and I had never heard it like that before. And sometimes when you approach, you talked about the nudge, it kind of depends on the people. Sometimes just a nudge, or sometimes they just almost need like the real just in their face. But, we have, quite a disagreement even within our family, and it's all perspective. My husband and I are educators, and our perspective is about moving forward and being allies. And, his twin brother is a police officer in the inner city. And so his perspective is very different. And so those conversations are hard. And so, in working with him, I've really learned to just say, oh, well, I've read this, or I'm learning this, or you might be interested in checking this out. And so when I put it on me in that I have done this, or this is my experience, it's maybe easier to take rather than criticizing the fact that, no, guess what? All people don't act like the people that you're spending your time with, which is really what I'd like to say. You need to really check your bias. You've got a problem, but it's perspective. And so just kind of trying to keep it as though I'm offering something rather than pointing out the wrong has helped to facilitate more conversation rather than ending it.
You're also acknowledging that you need to grow too, and that you're seeking growth. And I think I think one of the things you said is like, this is what I've read to help me learn. So I think that hopefully that makes those sorts of conversations. It's not like you're coming from what was one of the claims where you're an elitist. You're not coming from an elitist, stance. You're saying, it's taken me some steps to get to where I'm at as well. We're almost out of time, Tim, and I know we kind of wanted to go over some action steps, Tim and Isaac. So are there some things that you would like to talk about that this group can do to continue? And then, we as the four who have put these two on, I love to continue the conversation. I love that these are courageous conversations. We haven't really, the four of us, talked about what's next and where we want to go from here. But certainly, I think that probably both Tim and Isaac have some things that they would like to say in parting for now, as to what could be some action steps post reading White Fragility. One of those action steps is, if you haven't read it, you need to read it. I told a lot of my friends and people here, it's like, it's okay if you haven't read it before you come into it, but now I think it's critical that you do pick this and the other book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, up and read those as well. But go ahead, Tim and Isaac.
So actually, before we do that, and I see we got 8 minutes, I think I saw Scott's name light up several times. I just want to make sure. Scott, was there something you wanted to share or add before we give a few thoughts?
Yeah, so, and I had my dog barking in the background too, so I hit mute real quick. But no, I just, in summary, I think that the last section when we were talking about the people of color or white people saying that I don't see color, I just want to give a shout out to Anthony Whitson, who has opened my eyes to this entire opportunity, because I think I know I was one of those people, and I thought that was a good thing. And in so many ways, he has truly enlightened me, and I think the entire organization of Beringer Ingelheim, as to the opportunity to, make this truly about humanity and really having the courage to have these conversations. And I love the quote someone said earlier about listen up and not just speaking up, but truly listening and connecting. And I think it circles back nicely to the Stephen Covey quote earlier that said, seek to understand before being understood. And that's one of my favorite quotes. And I think in this case just really hits home for me personally. The other thing I'll say is when this whole thing started right after George Floyd, here's another way that Anthony helped me was, I was one of those that kind of had that guilt. And I also had a fear of what do I say? I'm not sure what to say. I want to say something. I want to do something, but I really just didn't know what. And Anthony had the courage to share with me that, silence is actually worse than not saying anything at all. And so Anthony, I want to publicly thank you for that. And from the bottom of my heart, this has truly had a huge impact on my life. And I know that, it's not just this one conversation, but after this call, I think if we all leave with the courage to have at least 1-2 conversations and truly listen, then others will pay it forward. And I think it's just one conversation at a time. And grace truly starts from within because, we can control what we do. We can't really control how people are going to respond, but we can control what we do and how we respond. And that's really all we can do going forward. So I love this call. This really had a huge impact on me. And I just thank the panel and thank you, Anthony, for having such an impact on my life.
And what's your name?
Scott Hicks.
Scott Hicks, I want to say thank you because I think you just did what Isaac and I are going to do, but you did it so succinctly and you did it in such a beautiful way. So thank you for being part of this conversation and tying so much of this together. You did a nice job. Isaac, you want to share a few thoughts? Then I'll
Yeah. Well, thank you, Scott, for your addition there. That was beautifully said. That was amazing. And it sounds like we need to get Anthony on this panel next time. Sounds like he's killing it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, guys, we've talked about a lot of my end notes. So I'll just run through them again really quick. I was going to leave you guys with some action steps to do. It's just really all along having the conversation. It's impossible to do these without engaging. So the first thing I say is have the conversation. Have conversations. I think this one's interesting. I think it's hard to understand people who are different from you if you don't have relationship with people that are different than you. So if you have people of color in your world at all, maybe that you haven't engaged because you guys are just different and don't have the same hobbies, don't work in the same spot at your job, or you take the same yoga class and you post up on opposite sides, that's fine. Maybe start having those conversations, just build relations, and not just to talk about these issues, but to just understand a different culture and a different kind of person than yourself. I think that's really important. So when those conversations do happen, first thing I would say is listen intently to the stories, to the things that people are saying who are not like you. Don't listen just to respond, listen to understand. The next one is empathy. I think it's incredibly important to extend empathy in all situations. And when someone tells you their story or they tell you something that offends them or something that happened to them, believe them and empathize with them. Put yourself in their position. I think the next thing is humble yourself. One thing that I've seen when I'm in these conversations is I can sense a defensiveness, and I think that's when the ego creeps up and we're making it about ourselves when it isn't actually about us. How is that other person feeling? If they're bold enough to share with you how they're feeling, then that's something that they are needing in that time. If they're coming at you with anger and malice and calling you names, that's kind of a different thing. But if they're coming at you and wanting you to understand and they're just sharing it from their heart, then really humble yourself and just truly listen. And this word's been thrown around a ton, but I think it's important to say again, but grace. Give yourselves grace. This is a hard topic to talk about. There's no such thing as mastering it. There isn't, can't master it. It's that hard. Know that you are an ally and you are on the continuum of becoming anti-racist. And even though you may be here or you may be here, you're still going to fail. And that's okay. Just give yourself grace, apologize, do what you have to do. Just let that person know you're trying, know yourself that you're trying, and keep going. And then last is learn and adapt. So as you're going through this process, reflect sometimes on how far you've come and what you are reading or looking at or whatever. Read books, read videos, have conversations with us and other people. We'll give you our email addresses. Learn and then adapt. Don't say the same. Learn, adapt. That's all I have. Thanks, guys.
Mine's real similar too. I'll just say, I think learners or leaders continue to, I think all change starts with ourselves individually. Continue to ask yourself, what can I do differently? And with every encounter that you have on this topic, boy, please see it as a door in and let down your defenses and the feelings and behaviors that we talked about earlier. They're natural to have them. Boy, don't ever let them become a door out of these conversations and a door out of building relationships. So use them as a door in. Focus on creating that change inside yourself. And then as you change, think of the ripples that you'll create in your life through your loved ones, through your family, through your workplace, through your neighborhood. And I think how we show up at the end of the day matters. The more work that we do with ourselves, the easier it is to take Stephen Covey's advice and use the 80-20 rule of effective communication, which 80% of it's really listening. So listen with your heart. I believe this is lifelong work. I don't think we'll ever be done. And I'm gonna also kind of do what Isaac did and Scott did. I'm gonna give Anthony some kudos. Let's begin to move these conversations toward realizing with all of our differences, we're all part of the human race and that we're all in this together, and support and celebrate our differences and continue to do the work of growing and learning and being the best version of who you are. Bring that to every situation, every person. I don't know how we don't contribute to something better for ourselves, our family, our community, our region, our world. Thank you. Well, I thank all you guys for showing up.
Read this book.
And I'll just end by saying, yep, there's the book. I love it. They both are talking about the reading and continuing to learn. And I guess as a librarian, I have to say that. Also, we will make sure that you have all of our email addresses so that you can contact us directly. We certainly encourage this. I encourage you, if you decide you want to do a book discussion, if you decide you want to have a book discussion guide, or you want some assistance with a book discussion, I can help you, or you're probably in contact with the local librarian, but that's something that you can go back to your communities and do that as well. But we will have something else planned. We just don't know exactly what that is yet, but please stay in touch with us. We will make this recording available to everyone who registered. And I think, Deb, we can even make it's something that they can continue to share. We also have the first book discussion available, recorded as well and archived. So that's something that folks can use. Anything else, Deb, from your perspective that you need to say before we depart?
I think you've touched on everything, Robin. As Robin mentioned, I will be sending out information, the link from today's recording and all the contact information. I do want to thank all of you that participated today. Thank you for being here. I'd like to give a special thank you to Robin, Isaac, and Tim for leading the discussion and the work that was put into preparation for this today. And I think the conversations are great. And I like what Tim said about being a ripple. So let's all go out there and be ripples in really positive ways. So I think that's all we have for today. Thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.